Welcome to Northern Ireland Consumer Week. My name's Richard Williams, I'm the Head of Transport with the Consumer Council. COVID-19 has had a huge impact on transport in Northern Ireland. The use of public transport has decreased rapidly, while cars have continued to remain quite high. Decarbonisation is a really big issue as well in Northern Ireland at the moment. 23% of carbon emissions come from the transport sector. So to discuss these issues, I have with me today Ian Campbell, the Director of Transport from TransLink. Hello, Ian.
Hello.
And Caroline Bloomfield, the Director of Sustrans.
Good afternoon.
Hi. So if I could just start with you, Ian, could you give us an idea about what impact COVID-19 has had on TransLink services?
Throughout the pandemic, Richard, TransLink have continued to operate bus and rail services across Northern Ireland throughout the different levels of restrictions that we've seen over the last 12 months. And it's fair to say that we have had to change significantly how we deliver public transport services. Our focus has been very much on keeping our staff and our customers safe. We have introduced reduced capacity on our services to allow for social distancing. We have, of course, face coverings have been made mandatory on all public transport services with some exemptions. And there are, alongside other controls, our focus has been on keeping customer confidence high so people feel safe in using our services. In addition to that, we have seen a drop-off in the number of people travelling generally, and that of course has hit our revenues whilst we still incur the cost of operating the network. But overall, we would regard the last 12 months as, whilst being very challenging, very rewarding, and our staff have continued to maintain those frontline services. And we're particularly pleased that we've been able to carry those key workers and those that are travelling for essential purposes. And as part of that, we have provided free travel to the health service staff during that time.
Okay. And obviously it's been a very challenging period, and as we're maybe drawing near the end, we hope, of the pandemic, we want to rebuild confidence in using the public transport system. Is there anything you think that we need to do? Are there things that we can do to try and rebuild that confidence?
Yes. First and foremost, we have to get the point across to the public that public transport is safe. Throughout the pandemic, the controls that we have put in, and particularly the way we clean our buses and trains and our stations, we use antiviral products. We do swab testing across our vehicles and our facilities, and that tells us that our services are COVID-free. Mm-hmm. We're also fortunate that throughout the period, the impact on our staff has been significantly lower than the wider population, which again informs us that public transport is safe, because our staff work in the front line and have been working amongst our passengers. But the fact that the impact of COVID has been low again tells us that public transport is safe. So it's getting that point across. Certainly the research would tell us, based on research that's been carried out in England recently, those people who use public transport do regard it as safe, which is why they use it each day. But there are a large percentage of people who are currently not using public transport or wary. So in terms of recovery, we have to get that point across and encourage people back to using bus and train services, because if they do try the service again, we believe they'll stay with it. Yeah.
And Caroline, if I could just turn to you, obviously COVID, as we've said, has had this huge impact, but do you think there are any opportunities and any things that we can gather or gain from this experience of COVID?
Well, we've certainly seen a massive upswing in the numbers of people walking or cycling. I think everybody will have noticed that. And I think it was especially apparent during the first lockdown, when the roads were so quiet, there were a lot fewer cars and a lot more people felt that it was safe to cycle. We saw families, people of all ages out cycling, and that was very encouraging. I think a lot of people discovered how enjoyable it is, how easy it is. And I think really what we want to focus on now is how do we keep people cycling and walking as part of their day-to-day activity. But we also know that we will need to see safe infrastructure put in place, because I think the reason it was so popular was because the roads were so quiet. Now that the cars are back on the roads to a greater extent, I don't think we're seeing quite the same numbers of people cycling again. But certainly it's been very, very encouraging to see that upswing. I think it has shown us how places can look when the cars are taken away. You see that places can be built for people. We've seen a number of pop-up cycle lanes go in, which are being assessed now. I think it's been really encouraging to see the use of those. And we know across the water, in London especially, there's been lots of trialling of low traffic neighbourhoods, school streets. There have been some difficulties, but also a lot of learning. And I think where they have been implemented, people are seeing places in a different way, that it's places being designed for people rather than for cars. Because I think for too long our focus has been on how do we move cars into and through our towns and cities, rather than how do we move people either on public transport or by walking or cycling.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. And Ian, just turning back to you. So in this issue we're talking about, Caroline has touched on there, around sustainability and decarbonising the transport sector. What do you think that the public transport provider like TransLink can do to assist, and what are they doing at the moment?
Well, the first thing, before I answer your question directly, I would say one of the things that's been exceptionally noticeable throughout the pandemic is the improvement in air quality. And everybody's commented on that. And that shows that if you take the private car off the road, there are improvements in air quality, and that in turn has benefits on health. But in terms of the wider sustainability piece, public transport, quite simply, if you travel on any of our buses or trains today, you will at least have your carbon footprint. On our more modern vehicles, you're actually cutting your carbon footprint by about 80%. And that's with vehicles today that operate under low emission diesel technology. We have plans in place to do away with fossil fuels across the public transport network in Northern Ireland. By 2030, we're going to reduce our carbon footprint by 50%. And we have outlined a target that by 2040, we will only operate a zero emission public transport network, and that forms part of our climate positive strategy. So in terms of the technology piece, we have plans in place to introduce zero emission transport. Just before Christmas, we introduced first on the island of Ireland, we introduced the first hydrogen double-deck bus fleet to go into service. And that was a pilot trial. Those vehicles will operate using hydrogen that ultimately will be manufactured on a wind farm in County Antrim. And this shows the technological opportunity that we believe exists in Northern Ireland today. People talk about the hydrogen economy. Well, this pilot project that we're involved in certainly shows that we have the technology, we have the intellectual property capability in order to deliver such a scheme on a large scale. Following on from that, we've placed an order for 100 zero emission buses for Belfast and Derry. And to put that into context, by 2022, by the mid part of 2022, a third of all Belfast Metro bus services will be operated by a zero emission fleet. So in terms of sustainability, TransLink does see very much that public transport has a key role to play in decarbonising Northern Ireland.
Okay, that's great. And just sort of bringing in the side from Caroline's line, maybe I'll ask you this. So TransLink is doing all this work with hydrogen buses and has great ideas about how we can use public transport. And you're talking about active travel, cycling and walking. Is there kind of a bit of a contradiction? If we really push for public transport, then we're not going to be walking and cycling? Do they dovetail, or how does that work?
I think they dovetail perfectly. I don't think we're in competition at all. I think the focus really has to be on sustainable transport, whether that's public transport, whether that's walking or cycling. I mean, we're looking at the moment at working with TransLink on the idea of end-to-end journey. So how do you walk or cycle to a railway station or a bus station, get on a bus or train, and then continue your journey at the other end? So I think they go hand in hand. We're certainly not in competition. I think we need to move the focus away from the individual private vehicle and focus on public transport and walking and cycling, so those sustainable forms of transport.
Okay. Moving away, obviously everyone seems to want to move away from private vehicles, but we are seeing there's a big push now towards electric vehicles. Do you think that they have a role to play?
I think they have a role to play, but they don't do anything about congestion or sedentary lifestyles or just the way our cities are designed. So I think they do have a place, but I would still like to see the focus on active and sustainable forms of transport.
Sure, yeah. And Ian, just actually you were talking about, again, the developments that Translink's put in place. Is this going to cost consumers money? Are they going to have to be paying a lot more for these particular sort of the buses and that different way of travelling?
Simple answer to that question is no. We're fortunate in Northern Ireland that we have a minister who is supportive of sustainable transport, and the capital budget within the Department for Infrastructure has a significant proportion of money has been set aside for this. So that investment is about attracting more people to use public transport and zero emission public transport at that. So no, this won't increase fares, but what it should do is it should make a virtue of using public transport, and that does. I would agree with what Carolyn said. The first and last mile of a public transport journey is active travel. If you use a bus or train, you will walk 15 minutes in each direction more than if you use the private car. So it's part of a wider strategy of investment in zero emissions public transport, investment in active travel that will encourage more people to use sustainable forms of transport.
Okay, so that's great. So we've heard it from Translink staff, there's going to be no fare increases, but I won't hold you to that one because I realise that that's quite a big...
As the result of investment in
zero
emissions transport.
I'm with you. So I just want to go back to, we're talking about like moving people away from using private cars, and that's the particular sort of like problem area. What do you think that we would need to do to try and get people to change their travel behaviour, the way that they travel?
Well, I think there is a two-pronged approach. I mean, one, we know that a lot of people actually do want to walk or cycle. We do a bike life survey every couple of years, and although there are some people who say, no, I'm never getting on a bicycle, and that's fine, there's about a third of respondents said that they would actually really like to cycle, but they're nervous. So we need to see better infrastructure so that they can feel safe while cycling, and I think then we need to provide support and encouragement that enable people to do that. So we run a number of programs, active travel in schools, in workplaces and in communities, to give people the skills and knowledge and confidence to get out there and cycle, and there's been a lot of success with those. So I think, you know, and we're not saying that absolutely everybody has to walk or cycle, because we know that that's not practical for everybody, but we know that there are lots of people who would like to walk or cycle. So it's how do we enable that to happen? I mean, for example, we know that 50% of children, of primary school children in Northern Ireland live under a mile from school, yet 2/3 of them are driven to school, and that's because parents don't feel that it's safe. So if we could do something about creating safer routes to school, we know that more children would walk or cycle or scoot, because 80% of them every year tell us they really want to do that. You know, so we know that it's not that people don't want to walk or cycle, they just don't feel that it's safe. So I think we need from the government's point of view, we need to have better and safer infrastructure, and then we need to also provide some skills and support and encouragement to people to help them get back on their bicycles or to start walking again. For some people, walking will be the easy option.
And thank you, Carol. And Ian, from Translink's point of view, what do you think that Translink can do to try and encourage people away from private cars in the future and onto public transport?
Well, I think very much it's about encouraging people back onto public transport. Pre-COVID, we did see record levels of people using the public transport services. Taking Carolyn's point about investment in public transport, where we have seen targeted investment on public transport systems, for example, the Glider service that operates between East and West Belfast, that project saw in the first year of operation a growth in the number of people using buses on that route by 35% in 12 months. That represented a 10% modal shift away from the private car. So it does, it illustrates very well that with the right level of investment and the right quality of service and the right level of customer service, you can attract people out of the private car. So for us in TransLink, it is about targeting investment and securing investment, but it's also ensuring that we deliver a customer journey experience that people find attractive and would use that in preference to the private car.
Yeah. And do you think that public transport can ever be really successful and meet the needs of rural consumers? It's a different kind of environment to the urban environment. We're like saying Glider has been very successful indeed, but for rural consumers it's more difficult and it's such a spread out network.
Yes, there are challenges in the rural network, but I think there's more that can be done. I think there is work that can be done in partnership between public and private operators. I think more can be done in terms of development of park and ride capability. So, and that could either be, so you drive to the interchange, so you can use public transport to get into the town or the city, or cycle indeed, and the provision of secure cycle areas and park and ride facilities. So I think there is more that can be done, but I think that is the challenge when we now look ahead. Having been through the COVID pandemic, there is the opportunity to take a step back and do things differently. And how do we actually attract people out of the private car and stop people buying the second car, for example? You mentioned earlier about do you think the electric car, and people are now talking about should I buy a diesel car? Well, what we would like to see is very much people should be saying, well, should I actually be buying a car at all? And can the needs of active travel or public transport actually be an alternative, particularly when, for some people, home working is going to play into the weekly working pattern. So if people aren't going to the office 5 days a week and are perhaps travelling in 2 or 3 days a week, why do you need a second car when there is the option of active travel and public transport? So those are the kind of change in approach and change in psyche that we would like to see debated.
It's obviously hard work, to actually get people to change. I mean, we did some groups recently in which the participants were telling us how the car was the most important thing. They were kind of wedded to their car, and I think perhaps it's a bit of a Northern Ireland thing with particularly the rural kind of nature. So it's quite a challenge to get people to actually make that change. But obviously we need to make that effort.
It is absolutely challenging, but we know that people are very interested in their health and improving their health, and a lot of people tell us that was the motivator that got them starting walking or cycling. But then afterwards they realise actually it's fun, it's fast, and it's really enjoyable. But in terms, we know that being physically active wards off a range of serious health conditions, be it stroke, type 2 diabetes, heart condition, and some cancers. So, a lot of people are thinking, right, I know I want to get more active, and that's what gets them started. But then we hear them afterwards saying, well, actually, no, it was the fastest way of getting into town. It's reliable, and I really enjoy it. So that's what keeps people cycling. So when people have started to make the change, they tend to stay. But for a lot of people, it is a big cultural shift, and we are very wedded to our cars in Northern Ireland, more so than other places.
The benefits which you're talking about, again, were described to us in relation to public transport. One of the things people were talking about was how relaxing it is to go on a bus, how you can read a book on a train, and there are these benefits which are beyond simply the getting from A to B as quickly as you can. So,
Definitely, and I think with walking and cycling as well, as part of your everyday routine, you're building in your exercise into the day. You don't have to go to a gym later on. You're getting your exercise just as part of your when otherwise you'd be sitting in a car. So it's
yeah. Okay, that's very good. Is there any sort of one key message that you would like to sort of say to consumers on this particular issue, Caroline?
I guess coming out of the pandemic, people have tried different things in the last year. This is an opportunity to try public transport, to walk, to cycle more, to use the car less. Let's do things differently now in the future.
And Ian, anything from TransLink that you would like to sort of say to the consumers of Northern Ireland?
First and foremost, public transport is safe. The use of public transport is very much part of combating climate change. And fundamentally, for any consumer out there who's thinking of returning to the workplace, when retail opens, returning to shopping in town and city centres, think about public transport. What I would say quite simply is, when you as a consumer are ready to return to public transport, we will be ready for you, and we'll welcome you with open arms and provide you with a good service.
Very good. And one thing which I would just want to mention is that the people we have spoken to, particularly older consumers, they tell us so much how they value the Smart Pass and the benefits of public transport that they get from that. So that's one thing which I think, a message from consumers to TransLink and to the policymakers is that the Smart Pass is such a great thing for older people.
Could I pick up one point you mentioned just on consumers, Richard? We very much welcome the role that consumers play in actually improving our services. We would encourage consumers firstly to play an active role in joining our passenger focus groups, or indeed our youth forum, because we get an awful lot of value out of that. That we do a lot of our consultation through those groups first and foremost before we engage with other stakeholders. But we also recognise, we would encourage our customers and consumers to give us feedback. We put an awful lot of time and effort into reviewing all feedback, and it makes us better by responding to it. And we do appreciate the work that the Consumer Council do in helping us review that feedback and helping to improve our bus and rail services.
Great, yeah. And the Consumer Council, as you say, work very closely with TransLink, and we all appreciate very much the work that you do, and we'll continue to do that. But then I think that will finish us off here. So thank you very much, Caroline, for coming in. Really appreciate you doing so. And yourself, Ian, thanks very much for coming in.